X. There were 47 people standing outside the Ritz-Carlton on Sherburne Street that Tuesday morning, and not one of them said a word. Not when the black SUV pulled up. Not when the doorman scrambled to open it. Not when a man in a charcoal suit stepped out, adjusted his cufflinks, and looked down at the young woman crouched on the sidewalk with a cracked phone screen and a cardboard coffee tray at her feet and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're blocking the entrance. X. Move." She looked up at him. Her name was Tavia Boateng, 26 years old, 5'4" in her delivery sneakers. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow she'd stopped explaining years ago, and she held herself the way certain people do, the kind of still that isn't relaxed, that's trained. She'd spent 4 years with the Canadian Armed Forces, 18 months in a specialized reconnaissance unit she still wasn't allowed to name in detail at dinner parties. She'd been home 14 months. She was delivering coffee because the transition programs didn't pay rent, and she had a mother with a pacemaker and a lease in Scarborough that wasn't going to renew itself. She'd been crouched because one of the cups had slipped and she was keeping it from spilling on the pavement. She wasn't blocking the entrance. She was 6 feet from it. She stood up slowly, looked at him. The man didn't wait for a response. He was already on his phone, already turning away, already done with her the way people are done with things they never fully looked at. His name was Hadley Drummond Pierce, 61 years old, chairman of Drummond Pierce Capital, a private equity firm that managed somewhere north of $4 billion in assets, much of it tied to commercial real estate development across Ontario and Alberta. He'd been photographed with 3 prime ministers. He had a profile in Toronto Life that called him a quiet titan. His assistant sent holiday cards with embossed crests. He walked past Tavia without another glance and disappeared through the revolving door. She stood there on Sherburne Street with 46 other people watching, the coffee tray balanced in her hands, and she did not say a single word back to him. That was the thing about Tavia. She never said things when she didn't have to. She stored them. She'd taken the delivery job through an app 6 weeks after she got back to Toronto. It wasn't what she'd planned, but plans from before looked different from the inside of a 2-bedroom apartment, where her mother, Delphine, slept with a monitor clipped to her index finger and woke up 3 times a night. Tavia had planned to finish her security certifications, use her clearance record as a reference, get into corporate or government protection work. There were firms that wanted people with her background. There were timelines. The timelines shifted when the pacemaker happened. She didn't talk about the adjustment much. She didn't talk about much in general, which the app's customer rating system seemed to appreciate. She had a 4.9, a comment that said, punctual, professional, no small talk, perfect, that she privately considered the most accurate description of herself she'd ever read. The morning she'd encountered Hadley Drummond Pierce, she'd been delivering an order for a law office on the 14th floor of the building next to the Ritz. 8 coffees, 2 teas, 1 oat milk chai that had been specified in the notes 3 separate times. The building's freight entrance was locked for maintenance. She'd come around front. 1 cup had wobbled. She'd crouched to stabilize it. That was all. That was the entire event, from her side of it. From Hadley's side, apparently, she had been an obstacle that required a public correction. She delivered the 14-floor order. She took the elevator up. She set the tray on the reception desk, confirmed the order, accepted the digital signature. She rode the elevator back down. She walked out onto Sherburne, got on her bike, and started her next delivery. She did not think about Hadley Drummond Pierce again that day. He thought about her exactly 0 times. That was perhaps the first mistake he made. The second one happened 3 weeks later. Tavia had a Tuesday regulars route that passed through the financial district. One of her stops was a small independent legal office on Adelaide. 3 lawyers, a paralegal named Odette, who tipped in cash and once asked her, almost offhandedly, "You ever think about going into legal investigation? You've got the look," which Tavia had taken as a compliment because Odette didn't give them for free. It was at that office on a Tuesday in March that she picked up the newspaper sitting on the waiting room table while Odette processed her delivery confirmation and read a small item on page 7 of the business section. Drummond Pierce Capital faces scrutiny over Scarborough displacement project. She read it twice, slowly. The article was short, 4 paragraphs, buried between a mutual fund advertisement and a section header. But what it said was this: a development project in Scarborough's North End, approved 18 months earlier with what the article called unusual speed, had displaced over 230 tenants from a rent-controlled building that Drummond Pierce had quietly acquired through a numbered subsidiary. Several tenants had filed complaints with the landlord and tenant board. One complaint, filed by a retired nurse named Yvonne, had been dismissed on a procedural technicality. An advocacy group was calling for a provincial review. Tavia set the paper down. Then she picked it up again and photographed it with her phone. She delivered the rest of her route. She went home. She looked up the advocacy group. She looked up the numbered subsidiary. She looked up the LTB filing. She did all of this the way she'd been trained to do reconnaissance. Methodically, without noise. Writing nothing down that she didn't need to. Keeping everything in a structure in her head that other people had to use spreadsheets for. She wasn't sure yet what she was doing. She told herself she was curious. She was lying to herself, but only a little. Her mother Delphine didn't know about any of this. Delphine Osiboteng was 63, retired from 31 years of nursing at Scarborough Health Network, and had the specific kind of dignity that comes from having done hard work with grace for a long time and knowing it. She made soup from scratch on Sundays. She kept a small framed photo of Tavia in uniform on the windowsill of the kitchen, next to her African violets, and never mentioned it unless someone else noticed it first. She had opinions about everything and shared them selectively. She had survived the pacemaker surgery with the same expression she used for minor inconveniences. She had also, Tavia discovered one evening in April, been a tenant in that building. Not currently, 7 years ago. She'd mentioned it the way she mentioned most things, obliquely, while doing something else. Tavia had been at the kitchen table with her laptop. Delphine had been washing dishes and talking about a former colleague who'd moved back to Mississauga. She was in that building on Galloway before they pushed everyone out, Delphine said. You remember Mrs. Adibawale, used to bring us chin-chin at Christmas. Tavia looked up. Which building on Galloway? The one they tore down. Or, no, they're still building it. They gutted it. Put up fencing 3 years ago. A pause. The sound of water. Patricia Adibawale lived there 40 years. Her daughter had to find her a basement somewhere in Ajax. Tavia closed her laptop very carefully. Mom, did you know the name of the company that bought it? Delphine turned from the sink. She looked at her daughter with the particular attention of a woman who had spent decades reading patients' faces for what they weren't saying. Why are you asking like that? I'm just asking. Delphine dried her hands. I don't know the company name. I know the man's name because Yvonne said it at the LTB hearing she went to. She said it very clearly. A pause. Drummond something. Drummond Pierce. Tavia said nothing. Tavia, I'm fine. You have your face. I don't have a face. You have your face, Delphine said again, in a tone that ended the conversation and simultaneously confirmed that it wasn't over. Now here's what I want you to understand about what Tavia did next, because it matters. She did not act immediately. She did not make calls she shouldn't have made, or access things she wasn't entitled to access. She had enough discipline and enough legal awareness to know exactly where the line was. What she did was legal. What she did was patient, and what she did was the kind of thing that only works if you're genuinely not afraid of how long it takes. She went back to the advocacy group. She reached out by email, identified herself honestly, veteran, local resident, personal connection to affected community, and asked if there was anything she could do. They were a small group. They needed help with document organization, with attendance at public meetings, with the kind of quiet administrative support that organizations like that always need and rarely get. She showed up. She kept showing up. Over the next 2 months, through the public record requests the group had filed, through LTB documents, through corporate registry lookups that anyone with an internet connection and patience could do, a picture assembled itself. Drummond Pierce Capital had acquired the Galloway Road building through a numbered company registered in Alberta. The acquisition had been approved under a zoning amendment that moved through City Committee in 11 days, uncommonly fast, and in a session that had been rescheduled twice and ultimately held at 7:45 in the morning with minimal public notice. 2 of the 3 committee members who voted yes had, within 8 months of the vote, received donations to affiliated charitable foundations from entities connected to Drummond Pierce. None of this was hidden. All of it was technically public. What it required was time, attention, and the ability to hold many separate documents in relation to each other until the shape of them became clear. Tavia was very good at that. She brought everything to Odette at the legal office on Adelaide, in a folder, on a Friday afternoon in May. Odette looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Where did you get all of this?" "Public records, corporate registry. The LTB filing the advocacy group has already submitted. That's all in there. This isn't all of it." "No," Tavia agreed, "but it's enough to give to someone who can get the rest." Odette looked up at her. "You want me to know someone at the Star? I think the Star would find this interesting. I think a journalist who covers municipal development and political donations would find this very interesting. I think if I walked in there myself, no one would call me back. I think if one of the 3 lawyers in your office made an introduction, someone would call back the same day." A pause. "I'm going to need to talk to Marcus," Odette said, meaning the senior partner. "I know," Tavia said. "I'll wait." She didn't have to wait long. Marcus Trent had been practicing municipal law for 22 years and had the careful, measured affect of someone who had learned to feel everything slightly after the fact. He read through the folder that afternoon. He made 2 phone calls. He asked Tavia 3 questions, one about sources, one about her own connection to the case, one that was really just him looking at her and deciding something. Then he picked up his phone and called a journalist named Sophie Girard at the Toronto Star. Sophie Girard called back in 40 minutes. Tavia was not in the room for that conversation. She sat in the waiting area and drank the cup of tea Odette brought her, and looked at the afternoon light coming through the frosted glass partition, and thought about Mrs. Adebawail in a basement apartment in Ajax. She thought about Yvonne and her LTB complaint dismissed on a technicality. She thought about 46 people on a sidewalk on Sherburne Street who said nothing. She thought about her mother's voice saying Drummond something. Drummond Pierce. The way Delphine had dried her hands before she said it, the same way she did everything, quietly, completely, without performance. The frosted glass partition cast a bar of light across the floor of the waiting room, and Tavia sat in it and was still. Sophie Girard's piece ran 6 weeks later. It was not page 7. It was not 4 paragraphs. It was the front page of the Saturday edition above the fold, with a sidebar that ran to the 3rd page, and it detailed the following: the Galloway Road acquisition and the anomalous pace of its zoning approval, the donation connections to the 2 committee members, which Sophie had independently verified and expanded, a pattern of similar acquisitions through numbered subsidiaries in 4 other Ontario municipalities going back 9 years, and a comment from a provincial housing advocate who called the pattern a textbook case of policy being used as a private instrument. Hadley Drummond Pierce's communications office issued a statement calling the article selective and misleading. The statement was 4 sentences long. By Monday morning, 3 members of provincial parliament had called for a review. By Wednesday, one of the committee members had issued a statement through his own lawyer. By Thursday, the Ontario Securities Commission had confirmed it was examining certain matters related to Drummond Pierce Capital's disclosure obligations to investors. The charitable foundation donations became, as these things do, their own separate story. Tavia read all of it on her phone, between deliveries, in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on Kingston Road. She didn't call anyone. She didn't post anything. She went back to her route. She was at the Ritz-Carlton on Sherbourne. Same building, different entrance this time, freight elevator working. 2 weeks after the story broke, with a breakfast order for a conference room on the 8th floor, when she heard his voice. Not directed at her. He didn't see her. He was in the lobby, standing near the concierge desk, in a different charcoal suit, on his phone, and his voice had a quality it hadn't had on the sidewalk that Tuesday in February. Tighter. Something pulled in it that wasn't there before. She recognized the feeling, if not the man. She'd heard that quality in voices in other contexts, in other countries, in rooms where things had already started going wrong, and the person speaking was the last to understand it. She picked up her order from the service desk. She confirmed the delivery. She took the freight elevator to 8. When she came back down, the lobby was empty. He was gone. She told her mother that night over the soup Delphine made every Sunday, a bean and smoked fish thing that took 4 hours and was worth it. Not everything. She told her the part that was hers to tell, that she had found some information in the public record, that she'd brought it to a lawyer who knew a journalist, that the story in the Star had come partly from that. Delphine listened without interrupting, which was how she listened when something was important. She stirred the soup once. She turned down the heat. Then she said, "You could have told me. I know. Why didn't you?" Tavia looked at her hands around the bowl. "Because I didn't want you to ask me to stop." A long silence. The kitchen smelled like bay leaf and her mother's hand cream. "Tavia," Delphine said, "when have I ever asked you to stop doing something right?" She didn't have an answer for that. Her mother put a hand on the back of her head, briefly, the way she had when Tavia was 8 and had gotten her first stitches and was trying not to cry about it. The same gesture, the same weight. "Patricia Adebowale called me this morning," Delphine said. "She saw the article. She wanted to know who made it happen." A pause. "I told her I didn't know yet. I'll call her back tomorrow." Tavia said, "You don't have to tell her it was me." "I know I don't have to." Delphine picked up her spoon. "I'm going to anyway." The Provincial Review was formally announced 11 days after the Star piece ran. The OSC investigation was confirmed a month after that, in a press release that used the kind of language regulators use when they mean business but aren't ready to say so out loud yet. Matters of potential concern, ongoing review of disclosure practices, requests for documentation, and Drummond Pierce Capital's investor communications went quiet in the way that meant lawyers were now handling everything. The 2 city councilors on the committee didn't run for re-election that fall. Sophie Girard won a CAJ award for the reporting. In her acceptance remarks, she thanked several sources she couldn't name. She said what investigative journalists always say, because it's always true, that the stories don't begin with journalists, they begin with people who notice something, who decide that noticing isn't enough, and who do the slow, unglamorous work of turning what they've seen into something that can be seen by others. Tavia watched the ceremony clip on her phone in the kitchen at the table. Delphine was in the other room watching her shows. The African violets on the windowsill had bloomed again. They did that, quietly, reliably, on no schedule that made sense to anyone but themselves. She set her phone down. Outside, the city moved the way cities do, continuous, indifferent, full of people who didn't know each other's names and stood on sidewalks without speaking and let moments pass that they didn't understand yet were moments. Tavia Osei-Boateng had understood that morning on Sherburne Street, even if she hadn't known it then. Sometimes understanding is slow. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of a grocery run, or a Tuesday delivery route, or a Sunday soup that takes 4 hours. Sometimes it's just a newspaper on a waiting room table. She'd been called an obstacle. She had turned out to be something else entirely.